So, hello. I think, is this okay? Maybe there's a bit of feedback. It's fine. So far, so good. Okay, good. Right. I did engineering. I still have known that, yeah. All right, so hi everyone, hello again. So I'm Konstantina Pavla. First of all, I want to thank everyone for actually being and attending this workshop. And I want to express once again how happy I am, and also and also express my gratitude to Shakir for actually letting me be part of this again. And hopefully, what I would hope that we will get out of this workshop today is just to know a bit more than what you knew when you entered, as much as that. Okay, so let's start. I will be speaking about machine learning for healthcare. So as we already saw by this short discussion that we had with Shakir, this is a very huge topic. It can be approached in many different ways. So the way I structured this talk, it's quite subjective. But however, I always had in mind what I would like to have known when I start learning about healthcare. And this has been not a very long time. As many of you know from my talk in Women in Machine Learning, my background is not really in healthcare. My academic background is not in healthcare. I have a PhD in machine learning, but up until my postdoc, it was quite theoretical, and especially in the field of Bayesian nonparametrics. So my encounter with healthcare started last January, only a couple of months, which means that the learning curve was huge and still is, but I'm grateful for that for one main reason. I can challenge whatever I hear that is being applied, and vice versa. Whatever I'm used to thinking is being challenged. So this is also an advice and a suggestion for you to have in mind and think about. So let's start with what we will be covering. So the focus will be in personalized healthcare. So the questions that we'll be dealing with are questions about prognosis, diagnosis, treatment, all of this tailored to the individual. So we'll be talking about how machine learning can actually help on that after it is being applied from data, and we have plenty of them. And along the way, I will be covering topics, and I will be presenting examples of topics around uncertainty and how we can use probabilistic reasoning. And by now, if you have attended most of the talks, you will be accounted for what probabilistic reasoning is, hopefully. I will also be talking about model-free and model-based approaches. I will be also covering the topic that scared me the most, but now I love the most, which is the causality. And I still know least about compared to other topics. It's still an ongoing process, causality for me. And finally, I will be talking about the emerging framework of, well, that is now called mobile health. Sorry about that. And how mobile health framework can be actually used to implement intelligent automatic interventions, personalized, tailored to the individual. And finally, the last slide, it will be a slide of discussion about other challenges that I didn't really have the time to cover in this tutorial, in this workshop, but are of great importance as well. So let's start. Let's start by actually talking a bit about what personalized healthcare is. Personalized healthcare, traditionally, and still many of the notebooks out there, is defined to be synonymous to personalized medicine. However, but personalized medicine actually, the definition given by the National Genome Research Institute is the use of the individual genetic information to provide tailored treatment of a disease of prevention or diagnosis. However, the individual is more than what is defined by the genetic information. And we can actually see that by the heterogeneity that we can find in many diseases. So in order to understand the individual, we need to understand how the individual differs from the rest of the population. Unfortunately, we don't really have access to the whole information of what defines an individual by default. It's impossible, because if you think about it, we don't really know, even ourselves. We don't really know what our health status is 100%. For example, we don't really know what's the relation of symptoms to diseases, what are the generating mechanisms, what is the causation there. We don't really know, the medicine, the science of medicine doesn't really know that 100%. However, the more information we get about the individual, the closer we go towards that target. And this information doesn't come only from the genomics, but it comes from other sources as well, like the behavior of the individual, the medical history of the individual, the comorbidities, etc. So we need to be able to capture, in order to be able to capture the variability responsible for the different disease heterogeneities, we need to be able to capture as much information about the individual as possible. That means we need information for as many diverse sources of information as possible. So we put the individual in the center, and around it we can think about all the possible information we can get. Information from the electronic health records, which are actually quite common. Information about their lifestyle. Information about their genetics. Information about their behavior. Information about their environment, and you name it. Everything can be actually quantified today and can be actually used. As an example, let's look a bit more of the kind of information we can find in the electronic health records. We can find information a lot of information about the medical history of the individual. Information about the different procedures, about the different medical treatments they were prescribed, about the different lab tests that the doctors asked that they go through, or different diseases that they were diagnosed with. We're also living in 2018, and all of us, most of us, have I guess the ones that don't, it will be a surprise to me, have a phone with them, or some of us also have the wearables, and all these kind of devices actually track information about us 24/7. And all this kind of information can be used to dynamically track and learn more about the status of the individual. So I mentioned two examples where we can find information, and now hopefully it will be very obvious that this kind of information is quite diverse. It's quite it comes in different forms. It might be structured, might be unstructured. So we have access to a lot of information. What can we actually do? We, as researchers or as experts in using machine learning algorithms, we can actually deploy our knowledge in order to turn this information into actionable, into something actionable, something we can act on it in order to improve our understanding of the disease, or to improve the understanding of the patient. The way now I want to think about the challenge of applying machine learning into a healthcare problem is this structure of pyramid. On top, I have the task that I want to achieve, which is the personalization. In the middle level, I have the choice of the different machine learning algorithms that I can deploy. And on the low level, I have the data, the information that I have access to. The choice of the structure of the pyramid is not random. I chose that structure because this structure indicates the interdependency of each level on the others. For example, I should hope that the task of personalization will be successful, not only if I choose the right algorithm, but also if that algorithm uses data that are of good quality, for example. So it's really useful and important when I'm called to choose an algorithm to deal with the task of personalization, to have this structure of pyramid in mind. We are not choosing an algorithm independent of the task or the data. We're choosing an algorithm by looking both the task and the data. because as you may have heard before, if I put garbage in my algorithm, there will be garbage outside, no matter how efficient the algorithm is. That's why also I put the data on the lower level and with a bigger size, because for me, I think it's the most important part. And we tend to focus on the algorithms more than the data. And I think this is going to be another challenge that we need to think about. How we can improve the focus of the science or the research on the data collection or integration or cleaning or improving the quality problem than in the algorithms. But going back to the second level, the question now that we will ask again is what is the algorithm to choose? There are many algorithms out there, and if you ask different people, they will give you different answers based on their background experience, answer regarding what algorithm to choose for the personalization task. They will give you different answers because they have different experience, they come from different background, they are more familiar with the specific categories of algorithms, or they just want to focus more on something fast rather than something that improves understanding. So there's not one thing that one size fits everything. However, there are specific properties I will explain later in the following slides, that each algorithm used in healthcare should actually satisfy or should take into account. And first of all is that each algorithm should actually account for uncertainty. Can I ask what comes to your mind as a first thing when you say that in machine learning for healthcare we should account for uncertainty? What's the first thing that comes into?
Bayesian.
Very well. This is very biased, but it's very well. Very well. Yeah, that's very good. The Bayesian reasoning. Something else?
Missing data.
Missing data. Exactly. Very well. I guess people covered the two most important parts.
Outliers.
Sorry?
Outlier.
Outlier. Yes. Okay. In a sense, yes. The measurement error. Okay. Exactly. All these are aspects of uncertainty. Very well put. So I will approach the problem of the yes.
The risk of taking the wrong decision. Risk of taking the wrong decision. What's the
yes,
what's the,
exactly. Yes, the probability. The probability of error. Let's say the risk. Yes, that's true. So the way I will approach the uncertainty here is by explaining why the healthcare domain is a field where uncertainty is actually present. First of all, and then how we should actually, what is the framework, the principal framework that we should use to quantify this uncertainty. So here I present some reasons, examples of reasons why uncertainty is present in the healthcare domain. I briefly mentioned some of them before, and the first one is of course that we don't really know what's the actual association of symptoms to diseases, because we don't really know the cause of some of the diseases. So we're really, the knowledge we have actually is equal to a lot of uncertainty in that sense. I also said that we don't really know, even the science of medicine cannot really tell us for sure how the whole body works, the whole human body works 100%. And of course, someone mentioned about uncertainty. There's uncertainty from the data that comes, for example, from noise in the measurements that we have, the data we have access to. So, okay, we can live with this uncertainty, but when this uncertainty comes into play, when we have to deal with the healthcare task, then if we don't take this into account in a principled manner, then the result can be disastrous, especially when the healthcare task is a task of a decision-making process. If we're not sure about what we don't know, then making a decision about a healthcare problem, for example, whether I should give, whether a person, for example, suffers from a disease, it can have a lot of impact on the specific person. So uncertainty should be taken into account. As an example, imagine that someone goes to the doctor, and the patient has symptoms of a rare disease, and this disease has prevalence 0.2, so it's like a very small probability of observing this disease. So it's a very rare disease. So the doctor is a good scientist, and he actually wants to make sure, or to, as we say, to decrease his uncertainty around whether the person actually has the disease. And there is a screening test for that, but also the screening test comes with some probability of error. As indicated by the first probability that the conditional probability there is the probability that the screening test comes positive given that the disease is present. The probability is 0.85. So it's very accurate test. The general probability of the test coming positive is 0.08. And now the question that the doctor asks himself is, shall I suggest that the patient takes the exam? However, we need to take into account that there might be a reason that the exam should not be taken. For example, the financial status of the patient is is poor. So that specific blood exam screening test might be expensive. So there is a split between whether the doctor should actually care about the health of the patient and whether the doctor should also take into account of the expense that such a suggestion might incur. So what we just described is that the doctor should make a decision under uncertainty. It would be great if we had a framework, and this is exactly the Bayesian framework, that would actually provide a way to decrease this uncertainty, so that the life of the doctor is made easier. And that's exactly what the probabilistic and the Bayesian framework is doing. So it uses the language of probability to quantify uncertainty, and we have to take, and the ones that might already know, I will remind to you that in this Bayesian framework, we have two kinds of probabilities, the prior probability and the posterior probability. And then we use the Bayesian rule, the Bayes rule, to actually learn the posterior probability after we have seen some additional information. In that specific example, what I want to learn is the post-test belief, also known as posterior probability. What will be the probability of the patient having the disease given the test comes positive? Yes?
2%.
Yeah. Okay, you give me the answer. That's true. You already did the fraction. Okay, yeah, that's true. Exactly. So the answer, by applying the Bayesian rule that hopefully all of you know by now, we compute the posterior, the updated belief about the disease being positive given that the test comes positive. And this is 0.021. I remind to you that the prior belief of the disease is 0.002. I think it was 0.02. I made a mistake here. Yeah. Oh, okay. So the doctor is now able to, having seen this updated belief, is now able to make a more educated decision. I will come back to the domain of uncertainty and the Bayesian reasoning again later, actually a couple of times during my talk, because it's super important. But this was like a kind of reminder of why uncertainty is prevalent in the healthcare domain, and why we should use the principal framework of Bayesian reasoning to deal with it. The second thing, let's say, property that I like to think when I'm called to design an algorithm or to choose a model for healthcare is that always my decision should actually fit or improve my understanding of the domain and the specific task. Another way to think about it is that when I have patients that suffer from a disease, and for example the task is to implement an algorithm or a model that will be able to predict whether patients suffer from a disease, it's super important that prediction, the task of prediction, is not only drive, but to design the model, but also design a model that either improves your understanding of the disease or actually fits the understanding of the disease. And I will make it clearer what I mean just now. I will give you an example, the example of asthma. Asthma is a chronic disease, and also another characteristic of asthma is that it has a lot of variability in several domains. For example, symptoms that the patient suffer, disease, all of the disease pattern over time, how the disease progresses over time. Also, different patients have different responses to treatments. All this kind of variability makes the asthma a very challenging disease, both for the clinicians, because they don't really know exactly the cause, and also the variability makes it difficult for them to prescribe specific treatments to people, as the variability changes between even individuals that have the same features. So these are the facts about asthma, and the exact cause, as I said, is unknown. And now we are called to actually deal with the problem of understanding the disease. What will be your first choice of algorithm? You have the task of understanding. You have like some patients that have symptoms of asthma, and you don't know the cause. Are there any techniques that come into your mind that you will choose, that will be your first choice of algorithm to choose in order to understand, to get you better, give you a clearer picture of what's going on? All right, okay, this is, okay, you have used it before, yes, because it's more elaborate. That's good one. Okay, can you tell me why? True, but how much knowledge did you ingest in the algorithm? Your own knowledge, your own assumptions.
So you do use domain to create some feature. So I can just kind of put a little bit the conditions that you share.
All right. But does the more? Sorry, Secure, that you're speaking to me.
People wondered if we should give the lapel mic to people so that they can hear.
Okay. We have one?
Oh, you are using the, oh no, never mind.
I can go closer. Yeah. All right, anyway, okay, going back.
Will you repeat the answer from the last person?
It was like trees, regression. Trees. Yeah, regression trees. And I was asking like whether you will ingest any kind of prior information into that, and the answer was that yes, some expert domain knowledge into the future regarding the future engineering. Okay, so this partially gives me grounds to answer to present the next part. So there are two ways actually to approach this problem. First, and in general, this is the way people do. The first approach is to assume nothing and just choose an algorithm out of the self. For example, the simple one that you can think is clustering. And this is simple because you don't make an assumption. You just use the algorithm. You apply clustering on the symptoms, on the observations, and then the algorithm gives you some clusters. The second approach is that is something that is more informed. Sometimes people ask, they have some prior information about what's going on underlying the symptoms. For example, they might ask a clinician, and there are a number of clinicians, and the clinicians say, okay, very often we observe that we hear and we believe from our experience in the domain that asthma is actually associated with triggers or some genetic factors related to the individual. So is there a way we can actually use this useful information, prior information, to build a model, an algorithm that can actually be applied in our observations and give us some better understanding? But we just described that actually the two main differences of the approach is the approach of model-free and the approach of what are model-free and model-based. The model-free approaches, I repeat, make zero assumptions. So we don't ingest any kind of prior belief regarding the generating mechanism of the observations. And in the specific example of asthma, we just apply the algorithm like straightforward on the data, on the symptoms, and we get some result. But they do give us, the result that they give actually improve the understanding of the disease. While in the model-based approach, we come a bit more prepared before we apply something, and we say, okay, I have a slight idea of what might be going on. Is there a way that I can actually test this idea to see whether the observations agree with what I assumed prior? So this is the main difference, in simply put, between the model-free and model-based approaches. Let's go a bit into more details. So model-free approaches. The model-free approaches, some examples, categories of families that fall under this umbrella are, I'm presenting them here, decision trees, K-means, neural networks, support vector machines, clustering, regression, and so on and so forth. So most of these algorithms have been around for decades. So these are algorithms that are already implemented packages out there. You can just take them, put your data, and get some results. So there is not a lot of, doesn't really require a lot of knowledge from your side. The good thing about these algorithms is that they don't are easy to use, first of all, and it's a very good first step towards improving the understanding of the domain of the task at hand. So, and I need to emphasize that I got surprised how many times I didn't use the simple methods, and when I used, my picture about the task changed completely. They may look simple, but simplicity should always be the first step in machine learning, I think. So here. Okay. So let's see an example now of clustering for the people that don't really know what clustering is. Clustering looks at some observations. In that specific example here, we may think that it's a data point here. Black point is the information we have about the patient, and are actually a collection of symptoms like coughing, wheeze, age of onset, asthma duration, lung function, and so on and so forth. We plot them in the dimensional space, and then we apply the clustering algorithm, and the clustering actually, by applying a similarity measure, outputs a number of groups, a number of clusters, and of course, inside this cluster, the patients or the units, as we usually call them, they are similar, as we say. What the similarity means is something that should be our call to find out further. But the fact that the algorithm found this kind of similarity is the first step that there's something underlying going on. The algorithm picked up the signal. We don't really know what it means, but we can look further. You mean that there's already some assumptions there? I agree with you. There are already some assumptions, but the assumptions there are more like assumptions imposed to find patterns in the dimensions than assumptions about the generating mechanism of the data. There is no, I agree with you, and this is a perfect note that there is no algorithm without making any assumptions. I'm really happy that you mentioned that. But the assumption I'm referring here is about what I believe the generating mechanism there is. The kind of assumptions that the algorithm makes here is about, let's say, in a way I think about it, is mathematical assumptions of similarity. Does this make sense?
So when you say that there's assumptions to be
The algorithm cannot tell me how the data is being produced, the observations. Or in another way, can I sample from this model? Can I produce data from this model? Can I generate data? No, because it doesn't give me a generated mechanism. It tells me, it finds patterns in the data, captures a signal there, and it makes assumptions to capture the signal, but it doesn't tell me anything about how the data is produced. If you have to use, okay, then you change the model. You change. We're talking about probabilistic approaches there. I'm talking about the simplest version of. There, you make assumptions there. No, the generating mechanism. Okay. All right. So let's see now an actual application of model-free approaches. This is work by Finale, Dossi, Velez. Sorry, I'm not doing very well with names. And colleagues. So this is an application of a model of clustering in autism spectrum disorder. The ASD is a developmental disorder that actually affects communication and behavior. And of course, there's again, it's a quite heterogeneous disorder, and there's a great variation in the type and the severity of symptoms among the individuals. And the symptoms that are being actually used to diagnose the disorder are social communication difficulties, for example, restricted interest, repetitive behaviors. What the researchers here had as motivation is that, okay, we're going to use, we're going to try and cluster the patients into similar groups in order to actually find a way to individualize treatment regimes. Maybe by finding distinct subgroups, we'll get a better idea maybe about different kinds of treatments that we can administer to different subgroups. All right? So they actually did that by not looking at the symptoms, but by looking at the comorbidities, because they found that they have more information. What I mean by that, the comorbidity, first of all, a disease or a syndrome that co-occurs with the target disease, and the ASD is actually found to be associated highly with a lot of comorbidities. So the patients that suffer from ASD suffer also from a lot of other disorders. Some of them are gastrointestinal disorders, epilepsy, sleep disorders, muscular dystrophy, psychiatric illness, and so on and so forth. Many of them. So they thought that maybe we should actually apply clustering in the domain of the comorbidities for the ASD. So if this patient, if we capture information about the comorbidities that these patients suffer from, and then apply clustering of these comorbidities on the number of patients, let's look what we find, what we can find. So the way, just to give you information how the data, because I think most of the time when I attend talks and people don't give information on how the data is being represented and fed into the algorithm, it's very hard for me to follow. Maybe I'm not thinking too abstract as I should. But what they considered is they considered 5,000 children that for the 15 that were, of course, diagnosed with ASD for 15 years, and they were following the first 15 years of their lives. And they were asked actually to write down the frequency of occurrence of the different comorbidities, 55 of them. By doing so, and by splitting each year in a 6-month window, they actually constructed a vector for its patient child that consists of 1,350 dimensions. That's very large. So they take these vectors of all the patients and they apply hierarchical clustering. what they found is that they found three distinct trajectories, three distinct groups of patients, of children, that were actually associated with, characterized by different comorbidities. Each cluster is associated with the prevalence of a different comorbidity. The first one, for example, the black one, as depicted here, is associated with high frequency of seizures. The second with multi-system disorders, and the third one with psychiatric disorders. So what did the researchers think about the results? So, of course, they didn't understand why, what's the cause of the ASD by looking at this. But what they understood is that by getting these clusters in the domain of the comorbidities, we can actually understand that there is an underlying mechanism, or three different underlying mechanisms, that are responsible for the clusters that I see. And maybe, if I then go to experts in biology or in genetics, they can look at the results, they can actually give more insight about what's going on. So this is a good first step. Questions? Here, this is another example of a model 3 approach that some of you might already know. It became very popular. It's called the deep patient model, and this is actually a stack of neural networks used for future learning representation. What this model does is actually takes as input a feature vector it takes as input some information from the health records of the individual, as we can see on the top left, and is fed into a multi-layer network. Actually, each layer is a denoising autoencoder, and each layer learns a higher level representation of the output of the previous network. So in the end, what the model learns is a feature representation, a higher level feature representation of the patients. So I start with some features, some observations from some information from the electronic health record, and for each patient in the end, I have a different feature representation. Right? So what then they do with this model is that this model can actually be used as an input to a lot of different tasks, to facilitate a lot of different tasks in healthcare. An example that I put here is for a classifier for a prediction of a disease, for example. That's why, and I also use the logistic regression classifier to predict whether the patient will suffer from a disease. The good about this model is that it's task agnostic, because the output of the model or the contribution of the paper of the work is actually future representation algorithm. So you put the input information about the patient, taken from the electronic health record, and it outputs some future representation for that specific patient. And then you can plug this as a component, as an input for different healthcare tasks. And this is one of them is the disease prediction. The bad thing about that, can someone tell me what the bad thing about this? And bad may be a strong argument, but something that will be of concern. Yes, exactly. So we don't really know why it gave that representation that it gave. Mathematically, we know how it's constructed and what's the result of, like, what kind of functions gave this kind of result, because we know we design these functions in the neural network, but we don't really know why that kind of representation of the patient, how this relates to his health. So it doesn't really give me a lot of information about that. So it's not very, as we say, it's not very transparent. So this is an example of it. Actually, the model worked really well in the prediction task in most of the diseases that it was applied to. And that, of course, is a strong argument that it's a good model. However, will you ever trust this kind of model deployed in the healthcare? This is the question. And this is a debate, this is not a statement. It's an ongoing debate that people ask. Will you trust something that you cannot actually understand the rationale behind the solution that it gave to you? This is something that also bothers the research. So, yes? You mean use this model as a side, as a help, as something that can actually help the clinician, for example. I think this is the right way to think about it, if you ask me. Is this what you mean? When you say double standard, to actually take both sides, the expert and the algorithm? Okay, I see. Okay. This is a very interesting discussion. Yes, that's true. Whether we should trust an expert more than when you. Okay, this is a very philosophical question, I think. Yes, that's true. That's true. That's something that we can discuss afterwards. Definitely. That's okay. Yes. Will I trust? I think it's also the connection, to an extent, is also a connection that you have with the human being in front of you explaining your situation. You feel it's also the empathy factor that helps a lot to an extent. Well, this is about, maybe this topic about the possibility of failure and how much trust you can give to, or who is accountable if something goes wrong also. Yeah, these are actually issues that I think Kimi will raise in her talk tomorrow. That's very, very good topics. Right, interesting. So let's go to the other part now of the talk of the model-based approaches, the approaches that actually let us ingest some prior information about that we might have about the data generating mechanism. Or how the symptoms were observed in a disease, in the patient suffering from a disease, for example. And in this framework, the model-based approaches framework, this kind of framework is actually a great fit for the probabilistic reasoning. But first of all, let's see what we mean by using the word model. What do you mean I model something? I will use the definition by Bishop. This Bishop that says that the model is a definition, a set of assumptions about the problem domain expressed in a precise mathematical form that is used to create a machine learning solution. There's a lot of words there for me. I put it simple and I say a model is a set of assumptions that I define it to describe how the observed data is generated. This is my assumption. I see some data and I say, okay, I think this data has been generated like this. Let's see now how I build the model. In the example of asthma, for example, I have the observations, which might be the symptoms of the patient, which here I represent as Y. Then I introduce my assumptions and I say I spoke to some clinicians, as I said before, and the assumptions I make about the symptoms are that they're actually related, associated with some genetics factors or some medication that the patients are being administered. And I use the variable, the latent variable X, to represent this kind of assumption that I make. But I also assume, by using this downwards direct arrow, that my latent variable is actually related to the symptoms. So building the model doesn't only mean introducing latent variables, but also actually defining the relation with the observations. And that's how I build the graphical model. Here, so this is my design. This is my model. This is based on my personal belief how the data is being observed and how the data is being generated. Someone else might have a different belief, may make different assumptions, and this might end up in designing a different model. So each model actually expresses my belief about the data, how the data is generated, and it can be one of many. Each one of you might come up with a different model. Whether it is correct or not, it will be actually shown by fitting the models to the data. So I guess now it's a bit clearer what is the difference between the model-free and the model-based approaches. Okay. Uncertainty comes into play again. When I'm designing a model in the model-based approach, I should always consider uncertainty, especially in the healthcare domain, as we already mentioned. And an uncertainty here comes in many forms. It can come in the level of the observations. For example, it can be noise, measurement noise. It can come in the value of the latent parameters that I assumed. It can also come in the level of the model itself. How sure I am about the model that I just designed? Shall I consider one latent variable or more than one? All this should be quantified. And again, this is done by the probabilistic framework as defined by the probabilistic reasoning and the probability theory. Let's see how this is done in more details. Okay, I have the model here. I assume a prior distribution of the latent variable. That means a prior distribution over the possible values that the latent variable can take. And then I also consider the conditional distribution about over the observations. This is my prior belief, and by doing so, I have actually defined the generative process. By generative process, I mean that I can now actually sample from the model in two stages. First, I sample from the prior, and then I sample from the conditional observations. That's how I completely defined my probabilistic generative model. This is a reminder, probably, I know that most of you have attended a lot of talks about this over the in Java, but this is a good reminder. Questions? Can someone tell me what's the difference between the generative and the learning process? People that are not machine learning people? Okay. So, the difference is that in the generative process, I can actually generate data from the model in the two sampling stages. In the learning, what I need to do is actually, I need to update my beliefs about the latent variables. So instead of going from up down, I use the other way around. I'm going from the evidence on the observations up, and I'm updating my prior belief over X. And this is how it's done. I'm using again the Bayes rule to learn the posterior over the latent variable. So if I look at the Bayes rule, what the Bayes rule says is that the conditional now after the posterior, which is the conditional after over the latent variable after I have seen the data, the Y observations, is actually proportional, if we look only on the data, proportional to the likelihood times the prior belief. In a really nice graphical plot, to make things clearer, we have here the distribution of the prior, and we have here the distribution here of the likelihood. And what we can actually see is that the posterior now, the updated belief of the latent variable, is the result of two driving forces, the prior and the likelihood. That's why it's sitting in the middle. Okay? model-based approach, is a model modeled by Sula Metai and Sucesaria, and they consider the disease of scleroderma. The disease of scleroderma is again a chronic heterogeneous disease, and it affects different organs of the body, mainly the liver, I think, I may be wrong. And the target here was to actually find a way to predict the disease progression, as indicated by biomarkers and called predictive force vital capacity over time. So there are two things here to remember: that the scleroderma, first of all, is captured. The progression of the disease is captured over time, and it is quite heterogeneous. That means there's a lot of variability among the individuals that suffer from the same disease but have like extensively variable symptoms. So they want to actually see why this is happening. Again, because here they are using a model-based approach, they make some assumptions about the causes of the variability. They say that there should be like 4 different causes that actually are the reason for this. They assume actually that there might be 4 different sources of variability. One that comes from the population, from the subpopulation, the individual, and the structural noise. This is their assumption. It doesn't mean that it holds true. This is something that the data will decide using the Bayesian framework. This is their prior belief how to build the model. I'm not going to give details what its component means. It's just, you can take it as a different source of variability in. Here, this is actually invested in the sampling probability of the observations. This is a Gaussian that has the 4 terms as the sum of the 4 terms as their mean, as its mean. Again, this is their assumption, and the model looks like that. It's a lot to digest. But what I want you to get out of it is, first of all, that of course it's a graphical model. That means there are some assumptions there about the latent variables and how they connect to the observation, which is the Y in the middle. I want you to focus on the colorful plates, which are actually the components, the parts of the graphical model that the researchers assumed that are the different sources of variability in the observations. Let's see, did this assumption actually fit the data? This is the result that they got after trying the model on the data, on the patients that they had observations for. Each column represents different patients, so we have like 4 different individuals, and each row represents how many components they considered at each time. Components as components in explaining the variability. The first case, they only considered 2 out of 4, and we see that the model, this kind of model doesn't really fit the data very well. But as they increase the number of components, so they said, okay, we don't consider only 2 sources of variability, but we consider 3 and then 4. What we see here is that their assumptions went from good, better, best. Okay. Again, this is only the data using the Bayesian reasoning, using the Bayesian inference and so on. Prior and then updated under the light of the evidence, the data into posterior. Sorry? In ablation? Sorry. How do you get that? Sorry, I didn't catch the term. I don't know this term. I don't know this term, really. No, I don't know what this term is. Yeah, then if this is the case. Well, some people call it model selection, but then this also involves like computing based factors and stuff to choose which model is better. But this is more of like presenting it actually, whether the curve fits the data to visually convince the audience. Yes.
So in the model 3 approach, you're kind of assuming that your uncertainty comes from the observation of the different features, and then you make a categorical classification at the end. Whereas here, you introduce an assumption that there might be different subtypes. And actually, as knowledge advances, maybe before we used to have a diagnosis of cancer, now we have different types of cancers that are very distinct. So in the unsupervised sort of clustering model, that's fine. In the classified world, in the model 3, you're assuming that there's one category that maps.
Okay.
Here, that's not quite the same, because you've got subtypes.
Okay. Very good point. I think let's go to the first half of your of what you just pointed out. In the model 3 case, the uncertainty is not dealt in a Bayesian framework, the way I presented. You can use model 3 approaches and introduce the Bayesian inference there, but I didn't talk about that. So the uncertainty there is not captured in a principal way, unless you alter the basic methodologies and turn them into Bayesian, for example, clustering. There, in using clustering, the uncertainty is not captured. But here, your second half part about the cancer example, I agree. This is ridiculous. All right, we can skip that because we discussed. So I think we can. Well, I was thinking here to have a break, but I think we spent some time in the beginning. So here I think no break. What do you think?
We can take a short one if you like. Just 3 minutes.
Sorry?
Very short, 3 minutes.
Yeah, I guess 3-4 minutes. Just for because causality is coming. I'm gonna figure out. Than what we presented so far. And to put it differently, how does this kind of questions differ from the way you answer questions about prediction? Okay, for that I'm going to use two different models. One on the left is the generative model, the one that we have already described in the model-based approaches. You have seen the slide before. And the one on the right is what we say causal model. These models seem the same, but are completely and substantially different. And I want you to take it easy while I'm going through this. So in the generative model, what we are interested is in the conditional here distribution, which we call observational distribution. And what this distribution says is that what is the value of y if we observe that the x variable takes a specific value. What I just said is actually an indication of statistical dependence or association, as we say, between the variable x and the variable y. When I say statistical dependence, what I mean is that when I observe a value of x, or when I observe x, then somehow I get some information about the value of y, of what the value of y might be. Let's now go to the causal model on the right, where I'm interested in the conditional here, and the conditional now is called interventional. What this conditional says is, what is the distribution over y, of the values of y, given that now I go and actively intervene on the value of x. That means that I go and I change completely the value of x and I set it to a specific value. I set x to a specific value. In the first case scenario, one way to think about it, in the first model, x is a natural occurring entity that follows distribution. And the conditional here, the observational, says what is the probability of observing X given that, of observing Y, I'm sorry, given that X takes different kind of values. While here, in the causal model, I don't assume any probability over X. I go and I set the value of X to a specific value, and then I observe what happens in Y. Okay, this is a bit confusing. So we're not very confident answering whether they are actually the same, aren't they? In order to actually improve understanding, I'm going to use a very good example that is given by my friend Ferenc, and you can actually find it at his blog, where he explains in a very simple way and a very good to understand, easy to understand way, different kind of like machine learning topics that are scary. And please go, please go and check his website. It's really good, very funny. So in order to actually explain to us the causality and the causal model, what Ferenc is using an example of an espresso machine. He's actually a big fan of coffee. He can actually explain a lot of terms in machine learning, a lot of topics in machine learning using coffee. So he says that using the analogy of the coffee machine now, we assume that Y is the actual pressure in the espresso machine, while X is the reading of the built-in barometer. Okay? If I use the generative model to actually represent the relation between X and Y, what I'm actually using now is assuming that X, which is the reading of the barometer, follows a distribution, and assuming that the reading is that the barometer actually works, then the conditional distribution here is a unimodal, which is the actual distribution of the pressure is actually a unimodal distribution centered in the value of the X. Okay? In the causal model now, it says that if I use the causal model, what I'm actually saying is that I'm going and I am changing, actively putting my hand on the needle of the barometer, of the barometer which is now X, and put it in a specific value. And then I observe what happened to Y, which is the actual pressure of the espresso machine. Does this change? Answer? Does this change? Does this, me putting my hand on the barometer, change the value of the actual pressure? No. While here, this model is able to indicate statistical dependence because because I know that the reading of the barometer is actually statistically associated with the actual pressure. It gives information of the actual pressure. However, if I go and I put my hand on the needle of the barometer, that means I intervene, and I set X to a specific value, this doesn't mean that I change the distribution of X. Clear? Okay, I'm happy. So we are all thankful to parents. So some kind remark here that Q notation here comes from the two-pair notation, the famous statistician. So to indicate that I'm going and actively change and set the value of a variable to a specific value. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there a example of the causal model?
Yes.
Where you
Yes, of course. Why should we even care otherwise? Yeah, I think I will give an example. Of course. So which one do I want? Okay, which one should I use in which context? Of course, the answer depends. The answer is actually it depends on the task that you are going to solve. Okay. Imagine that we want in the healthcare domain. Again, we are actually using X to indicate the treatment, and the different treatment, the treatment that I want to administer to a patient that is suffering from a disease, and I have two choices of treatment, A and B. And Y is the response of the patient to the actual treatment, the treatment might be a drug, or drug A, drug B. So if I use the generative model, it will make sense only if that treatment was happening naturally and I didn't have to act on it. It was something that was observed, it was happening in the nature, it was given to the patient in the from a distribution, sample from a distribution, and then I wanted to observe how this change in the value of the treatment that happens naturally affects the distribution of the response. However, this is not the case, because when I want to answer what kind of treatment I want to give to the patient, this doesn't happen naturally. I want to act on it. I want to actually set the treatment to a specific value, and I want to see what's the effect of this me acting and providing this intervention has on the response of has as a response of the patient. Yes.
So, in an example of a person, say, is stressed out and the doctor recommends a change of scenery, like maybe a forest or something, would that be a causal treatment?
That you should treat it causally, yes. But whether the effect is actual causal, the relationship is causal, is under discussion, as we will see. Because it's not an easy thing whether you go and suggest something and see whether the result is actually, whether your suggestion has a positive or a negative result in order to infer causality. You need to make a lot more assumptions before you reach that point. Sorry, you need to check a lot more boxes, not assumptions, before you reach the conclusion of causality. You're going to using the causal model doesn't mean that I have reached the conclusion that there is a causal effect. I'll use that model to check causality. But there are a lot of things that this model needs to take into account before you reach causality. I will explain what I mean by that. Is it clear now the difference between generative and causal? Okay. So in this specific example, we can safely say that by setting the needle to a specific value doesn't really change the distribution of the actual pressure. So there is no causal effect from the barometer, the needle of the barometer reading to the actual pressure. All right, so the standard and the gold standard way of proving causality until now, and actually still now, is the randomized control trials. How many of you are familiar with the randomized control trials? Okay, good, Katja. So what this standard says is that actually it's a way of designing an experiment. Imagine that we want to see whether providing drug A or drug B actually has a causal effect. Has a causal effect on the patient. That means whether it changes the response of the disease on the patient. The disease response of the patient. What we proceed in this randomized control trial, how we proceed is as follows. We collect a number of population, and then we randomly, by flipping a coin, we assign them in two groups. And in each group, we give members of the group the two different choices of drugs, treatment A and treatment B. So we have group A and group B. And then we observe their response, which is the outcome of the treatment. And we actually conclude whether the treatment has a causal effect or not by taking the difference in the average effect of two groups. This is what this formula here says. Two things here. First, this is the principal and only the principal way and successful way of actually proving causality of a treatment on an outcome. And there are two reasons for that. First, that using randomized control trials, as the name implies, you have control over what's going on. And by control, that means that you actually know that by splitting these two groups randomly, the population randomly in two groups, you balance any kind of pathogens that might appear. And one of them is the pathogeny of confounding, which I will explain what it is. The other thing is that you can actually now manipulate the experiment. And by manipulation, that means that you actively know, you are the one to decide what treatment each group should take. So you actually have access to, you have the protocol of the experiment. Yes?
Not again naive question, but does this in some sense assume there's normality in the distribution between the two? Because like you could have a thing where the means are, we're checking different between the means, but it's like a very skewed distribution also, does it not change the actual thing?
The means over what? Over the present, over the future?
Sorry, my stats is not fantastic, so I'm going to use
no, it's
but for example, instead the group say, we're measuring the means, so like, you could have a lot of people that had a very high reaction, or positive reaction to treatment.
Yes, yes.
The distribution, so the mean one,
yeah.
what is the distribution of
yeah. That's where control comes into play. When we say that this experiment is controlled, that means that I have done my work to make sure that all the population in two groups is balanced in that sense. That's what statistically means balanced. That to our knowledge, we have made sure that there are not kind of unexplainable events going on inside the group. To put it simple, all the members of the group, the only thing that they differ is the treatment between the group, the treatment that they take.
Okay, I'm just wondering about that whole non-parametric kind of way of testing as opposed to parametric with that kind of thing about the fact that the means can be very different from each other. So if we try to say one's better than the other, so you're saying this one's better than this with the difference in averages. But you have this weird situation, but there's the point I'll take from the based on math, you have this weird situation where say the mean or the distribution looks like that, and that the means are such that this one is better than that one. But statistically, you can't say the one's actually significantly better than the other because of the skew distribution. But does the random selection actually avoid the skewness somehow?
Okay.
Like, can we actually control for that?
Yeah, that's something, I don't know. I don't know about that. Yeah, maybe someone has more experience in that. Yeah, that's true.
But I mean, I know that people like to use it, but it doesn't always apply in every situation. Like there's some ways, like with some like optimizers and stuff, they don't follow this problem.
But I guess it's a way of picking up that problem and looking into it.
Okay, so it should be like a post-fact test.
Yes. I think I need to move a bit further. Sorry, but that's a very good point. All right. So the problem is that this is ideal scenario, but sometimes it's quite difficult to achieve, to actually do randomized control trials. Might be expensive, recruiting is hard, and also takes a lot of time. Some people just leave it before it's finished. Also, that case is a bit theoretical. For example, if you want to prove if you want to check causally whether asbestos causes cancer, you cannot force people to actually inhale asbestos to see whether there's so, in absent, when there's no we cannot actually do control experiments. What we refer to is the observational studies. 10 minutes. Okay, I've been really relaxed here. So the challenge is here, how are we gonna reason about causality looking only on observational? No questions right now? No questions, I'm sorry. So we need to actually reason about causality using observational data. This is actually a huge problem, as I'm going to explain, because there are pathogenies in that, and the biggest of them is actually confounding. In order to explain what confounding is, assume that we have now some observations, we have access to some database, and we know that we have like a bunch of patients there that were in each patient getting YI, and some of the and there are administered different kind of treatments, treatment A and treatment B. So what can we do? Can we just emulate the randomized control trial? So if we do that, we say, okay, let's emulate. Let's just split the two groups that took different treatment. And what we can actually say is that, okay, the lower is the better, the lower response, the average response improved. We see here that treatment 2 is better. Can we actually say causally that the treatment 2 is better? Think and remember that we don't really know how the decision to administer, to suggest treatment 1/2 or treatment 2/1 to each patient was actually made. Some doctor somewhere decided to do so for some reasons that we don't know. When we see the responses that are stated with plot observations here. So the observations here in the plot indicate that treatment 2 is better. Can we actually conclude causally that this is a causal relationship between treatment and the response? Well, as we can see, no. Because there are some limitations. And the first limitation is that what we said already, the limitation of confounding. To understand what confounding is, let's see now that because I am a good scientist, I think, or I consider myself sometimes to be, is that, okay, I will look into another kind of information about the patients, and this is the information of location. What about if I plot the observation, the treatment, the average treatment response based on the location of the patients? So I noticed that there are two kinds of, that the patients are divided in two kinds of locations, like the urban, the ones that live in the city, and the ones that live in the rural places. And the result is exactly now, it's quite interesting, what I get. I get exactly the opposite conclusion, get to exactly the opposite conclusion. Now, treatment 1 is better in both groups. This is an example of confounding. So while on the overall population, treatment 1 was better, remember lower is better, now by introducing the variable of location and splitting the observation based on that, I see that treatment 2 is better. Sorry, treatment 1 is better. One story why this might be is that people, the residents in the city, they might suffer more severe symptoms of the disease, and they are administered treatment 1 because this is the most effective, or maybe because this is more well advertised in that location. While people in the rural places here, the majority of them is suggested that they take treatment 2. Maybe because in rural places they don't really have that much of intense symptoms. They have lighter symptoms, and treatment 2, and treatment 1 is not well advertised, even though it's more effective. Okay, so in this example, because of this, of what we just described, location comes as confounder because it affects both the decision of the treatment, because different treatments are popular in different places, and the response, because maybe people that live in the city, because of the pollution, the location affects the response to the disease. Okay. So, the confounder didn't let us causally infer a relationship between treatment and the response. It actually changes the picture. And have we ended? Now, okay, we found it. Can we just stop here? No, we can't, because there might be confounders that we don't know there are. If we know, we're in a happy place. If we have access to all the possible confounders that can happen, we can repeat this process until we get closer to a causal result, conclusion. But most of the time, we don't really know. We just see observations and assume. So this is a real problem. There are different kinds of solutions that people are using. I'm going to speed up here. All of the solutions, of course, assume that we know what are the confounders are. In reality, we can never be sure, for sure. There is no guarantee that we have covered all the possible confounders. The only way we can do that is by having access to the data collection process, and this is through the randomized control trial. because then I choose which patients to consider and what kind of confounding or not to take into account. I have access to this information. I can design the experiment. Okay, let's skip that. This is a nice example of why confounding can be actually end up making the situation go completely wrong. So this is maybe an example that you guys have encountered before. It is the famous pneumonia example by Caruana. And Caruana, he's a scientist, and while he was doing his postgraduate studies, I think in CMU, Carnegie Mellon, he joined the team where we were trying to implement a machine learning algorithm. I think it was a neural network that they were trying, and they wanted us to predict the patients, the risk of the patients that were suffering from pneumonia, given some symptoms they have. So what the model learned is that patients that suffer from asthma actually have a lower risk of pneumonia, which is actually really bad. But the thing is that the model didn't do wrong, in the sense that the model learned exactly what was in the data. So it learned the right statistical dependence, the right association between asthma and risk. But imagine what will happen if they deploy this model in a hospital. Then, if this is part of the decision-making process, then we're talking about causality then, right? Because there will be a yes or no answer. You have asthma? Okay, you can leave. You are not in a risk. So then you need to consider that then the question you are asking is actually a causal question. You are reasoning causally. So what happened here, what went wrong? Again, the model worked correctly. 2 minutes. Okay. Is that there was a confounder of the aggressive medication. The patients who were suffering from asthma were actually given a lot of drugs. And that helped them lower the risk of pneumonia. So without knowing this confounding problem, things can go really wrong. So this is a great example why making models should always consider in a causal framework as well, even when they're in a predictive framework. All right, okay, I think we will not have time for the intervention stuff. I'm happy to stop here. Sorry, I got a bit taken back. Okay, thank you very much.